Hello, welcome back. My name is Daniel Gomali. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thanks a lot for watching. Today I'm going to talk about a game I had against Michael Adams, who is undoubtedly one of the best chess players we've ever had in England. And I played him in round 5 of the English Chess Championship. So if you have a look at the game, just talk briefly about Michael Adams. So I believe he was born in the early 1970s, and he has won the British Championships on 8 occasions. Now that's some kind of modern record. And going further back, a player called Jonathan Penrose won the British Championship 10 times. I believe that's the record for most number of British Championships wins. However, that was a slightly weaker era than going on now. I don't think Penrose was a full-time professional. I might be wrong about that. He was obviously a very strong player. He was actually the brother of a very famous guy who's still around now. It's a very famous physicist called Sir Roger Penrose, who did a lot of important work with Stephen Hawking on black holes. And so obviously a very bright family, right? But Michael Adams first won the British Championships in the, I believe it was the late 1980s. So he would have been a defending champion. It was actually won it when he was 17. So it was amazingly, he was a defending champion in the British Championships when he was 18, which is incredible. And a little bit like Nigel Short, he was a prodigy. He was ahead of his time. And he obviously went on then from there, just his career went from strength to strength. I think he was partly helped by the fact there was like a mini chess boom in English chess around about that period. You had tournaments like Lloyd's Bank, you had tournaments like Watson Farley Williams, there was Oakham Young Masters, people like Vishy Anand and Peter Fiddler would play that, probably Shirov as well. Ivanchuk would often play a lot of these tournaments as well. As Hastings was a stronger tournament at that point. So there were a lot of sort of tournaments to play in the UK, just in the UK, and obviously would probably go abroad as well, even as a junior player. He then ended up playing in tournaments against some of the very best players in the world, people like Kramnik, Kasparov, and obviously people like Anand, who was the same kind of era as Mickey Adams. And I would say that Adams is a phenomenal positional player. So he's won the British Championships on 8 occasions. And I think if he'd probably played during the 1990s, so going from, I think 1997 was the last year he played it, when they had the sponsorship. And then he basically played abroad. I think he was possibly playing in Dortmund around about that period. And he came very close to winning the World Championship as well, the FIDE World Championship, lost to Rustam Kazimjanov in, I think it was either the late 1990s or early 2000s. And I don't think it was the one in Las Vegas. I believe it was one in maybe Elista or something like that. And Kazimjanov beat Topalov in the semi-finals. And then he managed to beat... Adams was winning one of the games, and if he was one move away, he was essentially one move away from becoming FIDE World Champion. So that was a bit sad. But obviously, during that period, he probably could have won more British Championships and already blown past Penrose's record by now. But in terms of British chess, he's obviously the gold standard. He's been the best player by miles for a long time. And when I analysed it, I think the first time I played him in a proper classical game was in a tournament in Sheffield, British Championships in Sheffield. And I analysed the game with him afterwards. I actually put that game up on YouTube as well. Got a lot of views, most views of any YouTube video. It was on iChess channel. So I don't know if that channel still exists or if that video still exists, but I had a huge number of views, much more than I get on this channel. And I mentioned that game. I said, that game, and sort of like quite a funny video. But when I analysed him afterwards, I got like an impression this is a world-class player. You just saw he was very good at problem solving. Calculation was really spot on. And he was very good at problem solving positions. So positions where I thought were like really problematic, he would find easy solutions for it. which really impressed me. And I felt it was a different level to all the other English players I'd analysed with before. You know, some very strong players. I felt like that was a higher level. So that was just my impression. But this is a game that I played against him in the English Championships. Going to have a look at the game. It didn't end well for me, unfortunately. So I played the French, which I don't normally play, but I'm trying to build a chessable course. And I wanted to see what he did against the French, because obviously I'm trying to build a chessable course on the white side. And I wanted to see what he did against it. I wanted to see what a world-class Grandmaster would do against the French. So that's why I played the French. But he surprised me by playing the advanced variation. It wasn't what I was expecting. And I was incredibly nervous at the start of the game. Even more nervous than normal. I think the pressure of the game got to me. It was obviously a massive game, because I felt like if I won it, I was in a great position to potentially go on and win the tournament, become English champion. Obviously, I would still have had to play Gawain, which would have been tough in the afternoon. Just as tough, probably. But I'd have probably had a double black, actually. And that would have been tough as well. So it's tough to become English champion, because, you know, you get a result against Mickey, which is fantastic. You still got to face Gawain, right? If I drew with Mickey, we'd still be on the same score. But unfortunately, I didn't draw for me. 97, that's a decent move, I think. I actually analysed this before the game. So obviously, I didn't expect the advance, but I had to have some idea what to do against it. But I didn't. The problem was I didn't analyse it deeply enough. And all this is fine, because they've gone to A3, now they can't go to C3 and bolster the pawn. So, I mean, what I mean is when you take, then they get a better square on C3. But I think in this particular position, they kind of want to go to C2 anyway, rather than C3, because they're defending this pawn. I'm putting a lot of pressure on the pawn. They don't really want to go G4, because that weakens the king's side a lot. Maybe they can consider lines with G4, but I don't think that's really what White wants to do. So I went Bishop E7, and I cast Mickey Adams castled. I think his actual real name is Michael, but I don't think he minds being called Mickey. It's kind of like a typical name for him, but he's originally from Cornwall. And so obviously Cornwall's like a battle. It's almost like a Magnus Carlsen situation, actually, where Magnus Carlsen became world champion from living in Norway, which was never really considered to be a top chess nation, really. And in a way, it's a little bit similar in a way with Adams, because he comes from Cornwall, which is not really considered to be like one of the stronger chess counties. There's not really any great players from Cornwall in the past before Adams, as far as I'm aware. So he really overcome the odds in that sense. Obviously, a lot of the better players came from London. I think he eventually moved to London, got a flat in London, because obviously he wanted to be closer to chess tournaments. Nigel Short, in a way, may be similar, because he came from Bolton, which is in Lancashire. Again, I mean, he did quite well in county championships, but not considered to be like a hub. So it shows you that talent can overcome a lot. But I think, you know, probably statistically, most of the better players have come from London in England. So that's obviously a massive advantage if you live in London originally. But Bishop D3 was a good move positionally speaking. You're attacking the knight. And I played the move F6, which again, Summerscale said this to me once. He said the key with the French is all you got to remember is you play the pawn break C5 and F6. That's all you remember. So that's what I was thinking of when I played the move F6. You know, I was considering that old advice. Again, Aaron Summerscale, another player who is originally, I believe, from London. So again, a little bit of an advantage there, coming from London. It took back the pawn. And I was expecting maybe the move he played or rook e1. And he Bishop f4, I was expecting or rook e1. And he did play Bishop f4. And again, it's a sign where I'm nervous, because I probably didn't spend enough time here. And I played a move which, as soon as I played it, I was like, what am I doing? That's such a bad move. And because my first gut instinct was to play g5. And the funny thing is, I think I've analysed this position before. Vaguely. Or, you know, or not, or similar kind of position. I think I've had a similar kind of position in a training game against computers. I probably got hammered in that game as well, right? But after g5, obviously the critical move is to take. I don't think you can really afford to go back. There's no other logical move. You have to take. Take with a bishop. And then I was worried about the move bishop e5. Now I looked at this and I thought bishop e7. Funny enough, the computer says that black is doing quite well here. But I was a little bit afraid of this position. So I thought this bishop's really on a great diagonal. The king is looking a bit suspicious. But computer says, I mean, even a move like f4 is, sorry, say if they go rook e1, you could play a move like f4 and bring the bishop out. I saw this move f4. But yeah, I was a little bit uncomfortable about that move bishop e5. There's also f4 here immediately, which is another option to go bishop f5. This knight doesn't really have a great square to go to. But another move it quite liked was bishop d6, actually. The engine quite likes bishop d6. And after rook e8, played a move knight b4. That's probably the best option for white. And I think the idea is you're fighting for control over this e5 square. So you want to trade the knights and then dominate e5. And this is the kind of thing that you're scared about when you play a good positional player, that they're going to do this. And just sort of like, just control the game. And I think that's, you know, what someone like Adams is good at, is controlling the game. A little bit like Magnus Carlsen, is good positional player. So the reason he's good strategically and positionally, I think, is partly because he's got good positional instincts, and also that he calculates well. So, you know, it's always underpinned by good calculation. So going back to this line, actually, what does the engine say after knight b4? What is the engine saying? Saying the best line is g4, right? So, okay, that makes some sense, because if you move the knight, if you take here, then you're in trouble, because bishop takes, you're hitting the bishop. So you don't have time to impose this blockade. Like, if it was white's move, you could well take on c6 here, and then go bishop e5, and you'd be doing quite well, I would assume. But, well, you take on d5, but after g4, it says the best line is knight d5. Okay, well, you know, again, computer chess. I mean, who was finding all this stuff, right? If I take on f3, then apparently bishop c7 is tremendously strong. Yeah, this is... we could even get this again. Because I'm so nervous, I'm never going to play all these moves, right? Sadly. King takes, bishop takes. You don't play at your best when you're nervous and you're intimidated by somebody. Okay, I'm making excuses in a way, because obviously, you know, it's obvious that Adams is a stronger player, right? A much stronger player, but at the same time, if you can't show your best, then it's kind of depressing. But going back to this position, yeah, so he gives some very weird lines with knight d5. Knight b4 is probably spottable, but all this other stuff I'm not sure. But I took here, and as soon as I played it, I wasn't very happy with my decision, because Adams took back the pawn. And I play bishop e6, so I've got to defend the pawn. Yeah, so as soon as I played it, because I was only really thinking about knight takes, which to be fair is not bad anyway, or bishop takes. But as soon as he took out the pawn, I was like, oh god, what am I doing? So I went here, and queen d2 was played, which was the top engine move. And I went rook c8. And rook fd1 was played. It's not actually the top move, but pretty good, pretty obvious. Like a good positional move. I went king h8, which again is not the top move. I think the top move is something like bishop f7. And the idea is maybe to go... I did maybe vaguely consider that idea, to go bishop h5. Maybe even to sack this pawn sometimes. Because if you rupture the pawn chain, that's more important than losing d5. d5 is actually almost a pawn you want to give away, because it's really in the game. This is a problem that I'm so tied down to this weakling pawn, and like, what's he actually doing for you? It's not. What have you done for me lately? Pawn on d5. You done enough. What have you done for me lately? Is that Janet Jackson's song? Or something vaguely rings a bell, right? But yeah, so basically this whole position, after when I felt very uncomfortable here, I thought probably not threatening bishop g5 as a positional move, because there's a knight takes e5 tactic. But those ideas are always in the air. But Adams played a very impressive move actually, h3. I felt I was talking about this yesterday and saying that one of the things that Magnus Carlsen mentioned in his book was that he learned from Boris Gelfand about the benefit of just improving pawn moves. So, just in case, it's also a Karpovian prophylactic measure in a way. Just in case that black would ever try to get g5 in, you've always got the option of dropping the bishop back to h2. So h3 is always a useful move. And it's essentially saying to black doesn't really have an active move. I felt very uncomfortable here because I'm not a player who feels comfortable playing positions where I don't have an active plan. And I don't know the French. I don't play the French. It's not my type of position. Bishop f7 may have been an option here. But I played queen d7. And yeah, I'm trying to hold on here. And I took. Now, I realised something like this was probably... I did see... I used the Adams technique, which he talks about in his book, which is falsifying. So, well, this is not a good sequence. Well, firstly, they could trade anyway and probably be better in any case, because the position is so good. This knight against this bishop. Yes, I've got the bishop pair, but that's really the only good thing about my position. But the other thing was I used this falsifying technique. So Adams in his book talks about, he wrote a book called Think Like a Super Grandmaster with a guy, Portuguese sort of like professor and chess player called Philip Hurtado. And it's a very good book actually. I recommend, if you've not bought that book, I would check out that book. It's a very good book. He wrote a book called Think Like a Super Grandmaster. One of the techniques they talked about in the book in terms of calculation was falsifying, which I thought was a really instructive technique. And he talked about how, you get to a position, you see your candidate moves, but you try to falsify the variation. You try to think about what's potentially wrong with a variation. And I think that's one of the reasons, because he uses that technique a lot, Adams, I think that's one of the reasons why he very rarely blunders. The difference between him and, say, a 2400 or even 2500 player is they make a lot more oversights, but he very rarely makes silly mistakes. And I think that there's a specific reason for that. It's not just because he's got great natural talent. He's actually concretely working these variations out. And I think he would have seen the move e6. This is what I was afraid of. And if you take... this intermezzo move actually works out very well for white, because you end up winning material. Bishop there is hit. If you play this, then I have queen takes e6. And if you move the bishop, then queen e7 is just destructive. So really this is just very, very bad for black, I would imagine. But going back to this position, I played a move bishop c5. And this is a really critical moment, because I was strongly considering playing taking this bishop, which I felt was a depressing position to play, because the bishop there was very bad. After bishop takes, funnily enough, the computer slightly prefers to move a6 to b6, which I find slightly weird, because normally you're taught to put your pawns on the opposite colour to your bishop. So my bishop's on g8. And also a6 kind of allows him to control c5. Well, I suppose c5 isn't really that relevant here. But anyway, let's just say I went b6. This is not much difference between a6 or b6 anyway. And now let's say they play this move. This is the idea that I was afraid of. And Adam said after game this is what he was intending to play. It's a very natural idea. You free the bishop. This pawn, extra pawn, is not that relevant. It's more important to liberate the bishop and set up tactical ideas. This is what I was afraid of. I think this idea is like rook e1. Or maybe take with a queen, actually. And just imagine you got this position. And this is actually fairly dangerous for black, I would say. You know, how do I even defend this position? I mean, what's it saying? What's the computer saying? It's saying queen d6. I think an engine would defend this as black, but for a human player in a practical game, it looks super scary, right? It's just so easy to play for white. I mean, you know, like you could play this blindfold, you put the queen on g5. You know, it's a very good example of where in opposite coloured bishops, in the end game it's very drawish, but in the middle game, the player with the attack, in this case white, has a far superior bishop to my bishop on g8, has a big advantage. So I think that was possible but super scary. So I decided to not go for that variation. I decided to play b6 anyway. And again, this is where I made a miscalculation because I thought this was bad because of bishop g5. And if I go back here, he has b4. And I thought, well, this is bad because I think, you know, this is the kind of scenario that you're trying to avoid. That something like this is probably what you're trying to avoid, I guess, because this kind of position is really bad. You know, if he gets a knight to d4, this bishop is just like a dream good knight versus bad bishop scenario. I mean, there is the move d4 to liberate the bishop and just give up a pawn just to liberate the bishop. But I guess we don't get enough after knight d4. Also, this pawn on f5 is weak as well. But what I miscalculated was after bishop g5, apparently you can take here. And now, if they take with a rook, if they take with a knight, it's obviously not ideal, right? Because you're losing a little bit of control. If they take with a rook, you can now take here and then go d4, and apparently you're okay. Which is what I missed in my calculations. Again, probably too nervous, wasn't spending enough time, and too intimidated by my opponent. You know, it happens sometimes. It's probably the same when Adams played against Kasparov, right? He didn't play to his best. Obviously, there's a bigger gap between me and Adams and Kasparov, but you know. Semela didn't have a great score against Kasparov, Mickey Adams, because I think probably slightly psyched out maybe by playing the great Kasparov. And a lot of other people like Gelfand had similar bad scores. Even Anand had a bad score against Kasparov because, you know, such an intimidating presence and a great player as well. So, yeah, there's often situations like that in sport, and that's what makes it interesting, right? You know, that's the challenge. The challenge for me is if I play a British Championships in future or an English Championships, how do I overcome that challenge of getting intimidated by playing people like Adams and people like David Howe, and how do I deal with that? You know, that's the interesting sort of dynamic. Maybe I need to like read some psychology books, right? Or see a sort of like Steve Peters type head shrink. Bishop. Yeah, so going back to this position anyway, knight e2, classy move, typical Adams move, good positional move, play with a purpose. The knight has come to f4. I started to crack up now, went queen e7, which is fine. Bishop d4, and I should just... Queen h4 actually wasn't too bad, I thought it was a mistake. It's just my next move was a real shocker. Bishop e7, very weird move. I don't know why I played that. The computer says I have to go rook e8, and it's sort of holding. It's not. It's really unpleasant, but it's... At the moment, I'm not losing. But after bishop e7, it's just got really bad. It's just a terrible move. As soon as I... Because again, I'm not concretely thinking about what he might do. So I falsified that variation before, but I didn't falsify this one. Because if I'd have seen this sequence h4, as soon as I got to this position, that I thought this position is terrible. You know, he's threatening to trade and then go rook c1 and invade, and Yeah, I can't move. Literally can't move the queen. I start to see all these ideas like e6 and maybe dropping the bishop back or just again just like trade. I just don't like. I just felt uncomfortable. So computer doesn't like my next move. I think the best move is to go. Wow, a5. That's a hard move to spot. Very bad position. But interest is, yeah, the computer still thinks that black's position, although losing, is sort of, holding a little bit. But not after what I played. B5 is a very bad move because I just, out of pure desperation, want to bring the queen there. But that actually makes my position worse, ironically, than with the queen on h6. Putting the queen on a6 really is away from the king side. So this is what happened. And he went e6 is a really star move. Again, this is a move we mentioned before that I was worried about. And finally it comes in. And I decided to resign the game because, well, again, little test. Let's say I played a move like here. There's lots of ways to lose this. But if I played a move like here, how would white win? White has forced checkmate here. Again, pause your computer. Think about the position. Well, again, this is what white would play. White would check, and then check here, and then when you block with a bishop, I have queen takes g7. Funny enough, I think I miscalculated here because I thought he could do this after this as well, but in fact, this is not checkmate now because bishop is defending. Although it still looks incredibly bad for many reasons. Not sure actually. Why does that lose by force? I mean, even though that h5 is very strong, just threatening h6. Like, what does black have, right? You can't. I don't think you can take this pawn. I guess it's just positionally very, very bad. I mean, no, okay, I miscalculated that. It says take. Terrible variation by me. e7 is crushing. Yeah, most forcing moves. So if you take, then knight g6. Yeah, okay. But if I trade first, let's say I trade first, and then do this same variation. But then the queen could invade on the queen side as well. Like, oh, this is very nice. e7, yeah. Very nice. Yeah, you do it rather than e7 immediately. You go knight g6 and then you go e7. This could have happened. It's a shame this didn't happen, right? For sadistic reasons. But yeah, very nice game by Adams, I would say. But I didn't play anywhere near my best. But at the end of the day, I think what it shows is that when you're playing against strong players, they can make you look worse than you are. Which I think is an important point. Obviously, I didn't perform my best. I felt a bit intimidated, a little bit in awe of my opponent. But Adams went on to... He drew... So that was round 5. He then had a very long game against Stanley Berlusconi, which may have had an effect on his final day performance because he had a very long game against Stanley Berlusconi in the afternoon, who's a very promising young junior player. Adams finally managed to win. And then the next day played against Amit, who's obviously a great player as well. Amit's been playing fantastic. And that was a tough game. And Amit really was equal when Adams decided to offer a draw. Obviously, the game result was fairly unclear at that point. Adams maybe could have played on. He probably would have been slight favourite to win that position, but the position was looking fairly solid for black, I would say. So it was a tough one. And then they went into a playoff because Gawain probably shouldn't have beaten Peter Wells, but he did. They went into playoff and then Adams lost the playoff. So I think what we're seeing actually now in British chess is a different dynamic now because I think we're seeing that Adams is being challenged really by Gawain to a certain extent. Because Adams always wins these tournaments. This is the first one he hasn't won, which is interesting, and Gawain's won it. The first time I can recall a national championship over the board where Adams has not won it. Or I played in. So it's an interesting dynamic going into the British because you also throw in players like Luke McShane into the mix, Shreyas Royal. So I think the British Championship is looking like a really exciting event. So we got a different challenge for Adams. He's not been challenged by like this before. Interested to see how he responds to that. In my opinion, as I said before, I think Adams is the best player, English player by miles, overall. But obviously he's getting older, and the other guys are like at their peak. So it's an interesting challenge. I don't think it's guaranteed that he's going to get past this Penrose record now, because I think because these guys are younger, and if they're playing all the British Championships as well, he's obviously going to have a very good chance to get by it. But it's not going to be straightforward, I don't think. It's an interesting dynamic. So I think the British Championship very excited this year. I'm going to be doing the commentary with Adam Hunt. I must admit I preferred to do the commentary. When I was playing that game, I felt the pressure. I didn't really enjoy it, which is sad, but it is what it is. But I'll do the commentary. It's more fun. I probably should play, really, but I'll try and play next year. Not sure where it'll be next year. Maybe they'll put it on the Isle of Wight or something. There's an Isle of Wight chess festival I'm going to be playing in as well. So going all around the country, going to Hull, just played Leicester. Took me 8 hours to get back from Leicester. And then doing the commentary of the British Championships in Hull. Look out for that. And then I'm doing Isle of Wight at the start of next year, which is a lovely place actually. I've been to the Isle of Wight before, but I have been before for a wedding. A friend of mine, Gary O'Grady, got married, and he invited a few chess players along. He was kind enough to pay our expenses, and so I enjoyed that. But I'm going back there for a chess festival in 2025, so that'll be fun. Anyway, thanks for watching the video. Sorry it went on so long as usual. But as I said before, I'm going to be showing a lot of the games from this English Championships over the course of the next week, and testing people on some of the positions.